Guys, very much. You know what I love about this? Some things are real complicated, and you're like, oh, where's my money go? And when I give this, and some things are pretty straightforward. And I love the fact that we can come alongside a ministry like this and know that, honestly, that we have saved the lives of hundreds of babies, period. That's what happened. They would be dead, and now they're not. They are not. And that's so cool, and I love it. And so thank you for your giving. Thank you for your sacrifice. And we're going to continue to give you updates on all that God is doing. That clinic is incredible, okay? Incredible. So thank you very much. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 39, it says, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." So I grew up in most of my life as a child in New York, and we lived in an apartment complex. And I had a friend there, and he had some siblings, and the father was an violently abusive alcoholic. So this guy would get drunk, he'd come home, and he would just beat up on his kids. His mom was not in the picture. It was my friend the same age as I was, and, his dad would just, do what sometimes people who are alcoholics do. He beat up his children. They got so loud sometimes, it went on, that people would call the police, and the police would come, but then the police really wouldn't do anything. Some domestic, I guess it was, they couldn't prove anything. I don't understand that because I saw my friend's, marks, but they couldn't do anything, so they didn't do anything. And the people who took the brunt of all this were the kids, my friend and his two siblings, and bruised and kind of battered. My friend then was about 17 years old, and this went on most of their lives, but he was 17 years old, and his father decided, we got drunk one night and decided it was time to beat his family again. And my friend, 17 years old, we worked out all the time, so he decided it was not time to beat his siblings again. And the only person who got beat up in that situation was the dad. This morning, I want to continue our series, God Never Said That. And we're looking at phrases or misunderstandings that go on in the Bible that Christians sometimes think are there, like God won't give you more than you can handle. We talked about that last week. And then other verses in the Bible that are there, they're there, but we don't always understand what they mean. So this morning we're going to continue in that vein. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches us to turn the other cheek. But what does it actually mean? Because I've heard, throughout time, as a Christian for so long, I've heard people kind of use that, but they misunderstand what Jesus was actually saying. What is he saying? Does he really teach that my friend should just continue to take the abuse of his father as he beats up on his younger siblings and beats up on him? Is that what Jesus is saying? Well, he beats you, just, just let him beat you on the other side of the head, and, that's, you have to put up with it. That's just the way it is. Is that what Jesus is talking about, that they have to continue to take abuse? Jesus' instruction to turn the other cheek, found in Matthew chapter 5, verse 39, means to turn the tables on the person who is causing the abuse and the harm. It turns the tables. This is so important as we kind of process through this. And to overcome their sinful behavior with nonviolent means, okay? Creative, nonviolent acts of resistance. Jesus is not saying that we should never stop those who are causing harm to us or to those around us. If you see someone, you're a good Samaritan, and someone is getting beat up on the sidewalk, Jesus isn't saying, well, just yell to them, turn the other cheek, and just get beat up even more. That's not what Jesus is saying here. In fact, if you think he was, then he would be contradicting the Old Testament principle, which Jesus actually quotes which is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And then he goes on, the Sermon on the Mount says, but I tell you, and sometimes we think, well, he erased that. He didn't erase that. The goal of the principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was to establish justice and to resist revenge. That is very, very important. It also made sure, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, also made sure that punishment, the punishment that we dole out, is not worse than the crime itself. There needs to be a balance there. So if someone, for example, then knocks out your tooth, what Jesus would be saying was, no, you don't go over and knock out 5 of their teeth. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth doesn't mean, and this is what I've heard so many times, like, oh, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, therefore, if this person, then you do this, and they do this, you do this. That's not what it means at all. Even in the Old Testament, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth was talking about bringing about justice and keeping people from running out, you did this to my brother, now I'm going to kill your brother. They said no. In this verse, Jesus calls each one of us not to respond, listen, in kind. Not to respond, you did this to me, I do this to you. He's saying don't respond in kind to sinful behavior, but turn the other cheek, which fulfills the intention of the Old Testament principle here of an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which is the punishment, and the sentence should match the crime. That's what Jesus is saying. That's what the Bible is saying here. It brings about true justice in a very creative way that refuses to return harm for harm. You did this to me, I'm going to get even. You did this to me, I'm going to bring it to you. And usually, here's the problem, okay? The problem is when human beings will always escalate the situation. I was talking to Philip out here before this first service started, and we were just chatting about this a little bit. And he said, yeah, boy, in Kentucky, there were all kinds of things going on when I was growing up. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, these people would get in these feuds. And he said one time a guy did something to another guy, and then when the guy came out in the morning, the other person had a truck with concrete truck. And when he came out, his Cadillac was filled inside the car, all the way up past the window, all the way up to the car. So when he came up to his car, it was like a rock. He had filled the guy's car up with concrete. Now, I don't think it probably came because he built the fence too close to the other guys, but that's the point. Jesus is saying, no, don't go in kind. Don't continue to go in kind, because what usually happens, what do you think the person did who just lost their car because it was filled up with concrete? Said, well, we're even Steven. That's not what happened. It just escalates and escalates. So what Jesus is saying is this: we need to make sure that we're doing what God intended, and to bring about true justice in a creative way that doesn't return harm for harm. In other words, turning the other cheek avoids both extremes, where you act violently toward the other person who has done something to you, or that you passively sit back and just take the harm that comes to you. He's avoiding both extremes here. He's not saying I'm permitting someone to harm you. He's saying don't sit back passively and permit someone to harm you or those around you. But it has to be within the boundaries of what God has laid out. Now, the cultural context and all these things is so important. So this will be fun walking through it. Cultural context gives a lot of insight. Okay, in Jesus' day, hitting a person on the cheek was not a violent assault. It was a forceful insult. It was insulting. It was not, you wouldn't be taken off or you assaulted that person. That's not what Jesus is laying out as some violent assault. So someone violently assaults you or someone else, you just turn the other cheek and let them, violently assault. That's not what he's saying. This was more a forceful insult, because Jesus is very specific here, and it helps us out. He says, if someone slaps you on your right cheek, which implies a backhanded strike. A backhanded strike. Striking someone with the back of your hand is an act of, it's like an insulting gesture. It is not a physical attack as much as it's you saying to the other person, I am superior to you. You are lower than I am in position. A backhanded slap, person standing you, right hand, boom. Turn the other cheek, kind of. It's interesting how Jesus lays this out and flips it around. But it's not physical. It's not a physical assault on someone as much as it is an assertion of superiority, an insulting gesture to that person. It's a public insult to a person's dignity. So everyone there knows I am backhand you. It shows who's superior. You don't even strike them even in the proper way, if you will. You backhand the person. And it shows contempt. It shows contempt. I was kind of studying this through, and I thought, is it the same as when a person a few hundred years ago in England or whatever else, someone would do something and they would smack them with the glove? Well, that's not a violent assault. What that's saying is it's disrespectful. It's showing your superiority. It's showing disdain for the other person. It publicly disgraces that person. That's basically what they're talking about here. Jesus is not saying that we should passively stand by and let other people abuse us, or passively stand by and let other people abuse those around us. Someone at the first service said, so do you think it was okay for your friend to... Now, as a pastor, I would probably try to solve the problem in a different way. But the reality is, I think that he had the right to defend his younger siblings because no one else was defending them. They had no one to protect them. So he didn't kill him. Crime, punishment. So you may disagree, and it's totally fine. But back then I thought, well, man, he got what he deserved. I was like all over. I thought it was great. Now as a pastor and a little older, I would try to solve the problem in a different way, like I said. But my friend wasn't trying to viciously harm his dad. He was trying to defend himself and his siblings. And here's the thing. It ended the abuse. It was over after that happened. So Jesus is not saying that we have to stand passively by. And people would disagree with me on this. Stand passively by and take the abuse. So I want to break this down because this becomes even more interesting. I want to break this down. Turning the other cheek was a powerful rejection of that person's insult toward you. Jesus, I love the way, it's really amazing when we read these things and we get it in the historical context. It really opens it up. It challenges the other person, okay, to repeat the offense. But this time, turn the other cheek. He's looking at you, you backhand him. If you turn the other cheek, it forces them to hit you with the palm of your hand, which is done not to a person of lesser position, but to an equal. So once Jesus says, turn the other cheek, the other person is forced to either back down and not hit you, or if they're going to strike you, they're going to strike you with the palm of their hand, which basically pushes back on the fact that you have no dignity, and it's really incredible. It puts you in a position of an equal. Jesus is saying, turn the other cheek. Evil people may harm you. These people may try to do this, but they cannot take your dignity from you. They cannot take what only I can give. So he says, turn the other cheek. In other words, turn the other cheek tells the aggressor that you refuse to allow their sinful behavior determine your dignity. How many people do you know who grew up in my friend's environment, okay, where they went through abuse, whether physical abuse or go through the whole gamut of abuse, where it has changed the person's personality, their identity, of how they feel about themselves? This is what Jesus is saying. You do not allow an evil person to behave in such a way that it changes your view of yourself. I created you. I designed you. I determined those things. Do not allow another person to steal from you what I have given to you. Jesus is teaching that your actions, this is so interesting. He's also laying out the fact that your actions of turning the other cheek can reshape the entire relationship. It can change the relationship, pushing the aggressor, again, to either back down or in what Jesus wants, or treat you as an equal. When he says turn the other cheek, they either back down or they treat you as an equal. That's his point. And to drive the point home, all right, then he goes on to verse 40. To drive it all home, he says, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, then let him have your coat also. Now, once again, he teaches people to resist harmful greed, okay, because this part is all about greed. Resist this harmful greed with intense generosity. So watch the pendulum. And he's doing this on purpose, okay? Turn the other cheek. Doing it on purpose. That pendulum swings. He says intense generosity. The greedy person is trying to crush the poor person by dragging them into court. And then he says, he basically wants to take their inner garment as collateral for a loan in this lawsuit. In Hebrew law, you could take a person's outer garment, their coat, you could do that as collateral for the loan. But here's the thing. You had then to return that coat before nightfall, most likely because that was the only thing that a person had to keep them warm at night, was that coat. So taking that coat would be intense. And Jesus is saying to them, if they ask for your shirt, give them your coat as well. And you can see people just going, why would I do that? Why would I? You're choosing to give up your coat makes a powerful point. It makes what Christ is trying to do is get people to think. It transforms your life because you're conforming as you go through this process to the image of Christ. But Jesus is not just concerned about transforming your life, he's concerned about transforming the life of the other person. And it's an extremely generous response to what you're actually going through in that situation. Jesus wants us to show exceptional, outrageous generosity. Not to do what normal humans do, which is to respond in kind to what was done to you, and to respond with greed against greed. He's saying, no, do not respond in kind. Do not respond to greed and what someone doing to you with greed, but respond to greed with generosity. You think, oh, he's just a nice guy. That's not his point. And I was 15 years old, living in that same apartment complex. Another friend comes into my room. I had a coin collection, and I had these silver certificates, like a $1 bill or $5, $10, and a little dot on them. It shows that's worth this much in silver. And mine were in like mint condition. I had all these things. I had it in my closet. He went in my closet and stole some of my silver certificates. Now, I couldn't prove that he did it, but when you're using silver certificates to pay for stuff, you kind of, it's pretty obvious for a person who has more of a trained eye to look for that kind of stuff. So I knew he stole my silver certificates. I was ticked. I didn't have a lot, man. My dad there gave them to me. I got them for Christmas from my aunt and uncle, my mom, whatever. But these were important to me, and he stole them. So I didn't say anything, but I was going to get even. And I waited for him to invite me into his house again. We went to his apartment, and when we were in his apartment, we were in his room. And when he went out to get something, I stole the knife that his brother bought. He was in the military, brought back with him and gave to this guy. It was a really cool knife. I wasn't really into knives, but he took my stuff. So I was just going to get even, steal something of his that was important. And I did. I took it. A couple days later, I was like, feeling guilty about it. I'm not like I don't steal. I'm not like the person that has a problem with stealing stuff. And I felt bad about it. I wasn't a believer at that point, but the Holy Spirit still, God still give us innate ability to realize that shouldn't steal other people's stuff. And so I brought it back, and I put it back in his room. But I wanted to get even. And that's the thing. I wanted to get even. But I was thinking about it as I was writing this, and I was thinking, if Jesus were physically there with me, and he and I were having a conversation, what he would most likely say is, hey, go in your room, get some more stuff, and give it to him. Let him know that you know he took something important to you, and give him more of your stuff. Don't get even, but go beyond. Be generous. Do that. Jesus' goal, here's the thing, here's my point, okay? Jesus' goal is to cause the other person to feel ashamed of their behavior and to change their behavior and also to change their heart. So when they say you want your inner clothing and you give them your coat, it puts the person, and we'll get into this even more in a couple of minutes here, but it puts the person in a very difficult position. But Jesus' goal is to say, you be like me, and you being like me will draw that person closer to me. So you are changed, and they're changed as well. That's important. And I was processing through this. I like Les Mis, that play. And I was thinking about how when Jean Valjean was in the church, and the bishop, Jean Valjean, is caught by the police, stole all their silver, ran out, was going to just ditch and everything. They get caught by the police. They drag him back in there, and they say, we caught this man. He stole all this stuff. What do you want to do with him? And the bishop's like, no. He didn't steal it. I gave it to him. And my friend, he says to Jean Valjean, my friend, you forgot these other 2 silver candlesticks, and puts them in the sack as well. And what happens to Jean Valjean? It changes his entire life. Because instead of I helped you and this is what you did, and he basically said, hey, dude, I bought you back. All right, you live your life to serve God, and that's exactly what ends up happening. And I thought that's just a really cool example of kind of what Jesus is talking about here. Whoever gives up their shirt and coat is making a profound gesture of sacrifice, and also is showing a profound humility. And isn't that what we want to become more like? That's what Jesus calls us to do, to sacrifice, to put the other people first, to show humility. Jesus wants to cause the aggressor he wants them to be publicly confronted, okay, with their callousness, with their harm, and with their greedy behavior. Their harmful and greedy and callous behavior. Jesus wants them to be confronted with that. And sometimes the best way to do that, again, is you want this? Wait, here are the silver candlesticks. What? I should be put to death. I should be going to prison. And what is happening? And it causes a transformation. Well, that's what Jesus would desire, that it causes a transformation in the other person's life. In this case, they're confronted. Think about this. In the case we're talking about, okay, they are confronted with literally taking the clothes off another person's back. And it's not like today, oh, I lost my coat. You know how many coats are lost and found in the other building from soccer teams and everything? I mean, there's expensive stuff in there, all right? It's like Christmas shopping, and if no one's going to come back and get it. You know what I'm saying? It's like they leave their coats in there, and these coats are bucks. It's not that way. You had a coat, and if you didn't have your coat, you were going to freeze. And so this was an incredible, incredible gesture. So Jesus wants them to be confronted with their callous behavior. And what he's saying is, sure, take the shirt right off this person's back. how's everybody else going to see that? In court, in culture, how's that going to look? It forces people to honestly, to look at themselves in a different way. If you think about it, and then think about this, talking about like taking the inner clothing out, outer clothing, Jesus literally did that. He literally did that when they were going to, at the end of his life. He gave up both inner and outer clothing. And a final example on how we should respond and not respond in kind, Jesus lays this one out. And this one, I'm sure the people in that culture were sitting back going, what are you saying? What are you talking about? He says, whoever forces you to go 1 mile, okay, don't go 1 mile, go with him 2, verse 41. You think, big deal. No, it was a very big deal. Not only was it it would be terribly annoying for you if someone forced you to go 1 mile, whatever, that would be annoying. This isn't just annoying. In the first century, a Roman soldier could come to you and he could force you to carry his load of stuff up to 1,000 paces, which would be a Roman mile. All right, that's the context in which Jesus is talking. If someone asks you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. The Roman soldiers had the power to say to any one of you, hey, you, carry my stuff. Hey, you got your flocks? I need some of that because I'm hungry. Hey, you. And you had to do it. They had the ability because they had the power. They were in a position, okay, they thought themselves here and you here, so they could basically take what they wanted from you and you had to give it. Jesus is speaking to a group of people, the Jews at this point, who were in an exceptionally difficult situation. I mean, they were controlled by a military force far beyond themselves and couldn't do much about it for centuries. There was a foreign occupation they went through for centuries. So here comes Jesus. Now, understand, you're in this cultural context. You would not be confused by what he's saying here. We all might be because we don't live in that culture, but they weren't confused at all. They weren't confused. They were being degraded. They were being degraded through oppression and harassment. Now, take that on top of you're a Jew and you're waiting for the Messiah. What were you waiting for? You are waiting for a conquering king. You are waiting for someone who's going to liberate you. You are looking for the guy with the sword on the white horse. That's what you're waiting for. Start putting these things together. And all of a sudden, Jesus is saying, go 2 miles. And you're like, go 2 miles? I don't want to go 1 mile. If I'm forced to the point of death, okay, I'll do that. But that's not what this culture would want. This would be absolutely stunning. Stunning to anyone. What Jesus is saying would be stunning to anyone who lived in that culture. Not only are you telling us to submit to go 1 mile, you're asking us to go beyond what we are required actually to do. But Jesus is brilliant, and there is a method here. Again, you have to focus. Focus on the purpose. What is the purpose? He doesn't just go, hey, if he was 2, you go 3, okay? Everybody understands the context. They would have understood what he was saying. But listen, you got to focus on Jesus' purpose. Carrying a soldier's load, okay? Now, he says, you carry my load, and you grab carrying a soldier's load for an additional mile. Here's what happens. Culturally, it shifts the terms of the interaction. You take it 1 mile, he told you you did it. If you go 2 miles, it changes the terms of the interaction between the two of you. The whole thing is now shifted. And Jesus knows this. Rather than passively accept the demeaning treatment, people following Jesus' instruction creatively resist oppression and assert their dignity because they are willingly choosing to go the extra mile. I'm sorry, that's cool. The relationship, the interaction, the cultural thing, It changes everything. When you say, oh, no, I'll carry it another mile for you, changes it completely. When they would be treating the Roman soldiers, if they did that, if they went the second mile, they would be treating the Roman soldiers with intense generosity, as someone would treat a family member or a friend. See the change there? I'm here, you're here. All of a sudden you go the second mile, cultural change shifts the whole thing around. This is what someone, going an extra mile is something you would do for a family member or someone like a close friend. All right, like a month and a half ago, I was talking about Booker T. Washington. And this came to my mind when I was studying, and I'm going to use it again. Booker T. Washington was very famous, but he took over the Tuskegee Institute. African-American, takes over Tuskegee Institute, very well known, very well respected. I mean, he was nationally and world known. He goes walking through a very expensive neighborhood, and as he's walking through the neighborhood, a lady comes to him and says, hey, would you like to make some extra money by chopping my wood? And he said, he kind of said, sure. And so he rolls up his sleeves, gets the hatchet, and he cuts this woman's firewood. Not only does he do that, but Booker T. Washington not only cuts her firewood, but then he goes and he carries the wood inside of her home and stacks it nicely by her fireplace. He then says, have a nice day. He goes back to the Tuskegee Institute, and she finds out from another woman, hey, you know who that was hanging out in your house cutting your wood? No, Booker T. Washington. She was mortified. She knew who that was. She didn't recognize him in the name, but she knew the name. She knew who he was. She was mortified, okay? So now she humbly goes over to the Tuskegee Institute, meets him in his office, and she is just like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. And his response to me is amazing. He said, you know what? I don't mind. I had a little extra time. I don't mind rolling up my sleeves and doing some manual labor every once in a while, especially, he says, if it's in service to a friend. Okay? She is so moved by his intense generosity and kindness and gesture that she goes get all her rich buddies, okay, and they all donate tons of money to the Tuskegee Institute, all right? She had to look at herself in the mirror and kind of work through why she would even ask the question, but then he responds with such kindness and grace. I mean, that's what Jesus is talking about here. I mean, think about people who transform the world. Obviously, Jesus, top of the heap. But even if you look at, Martin Luther King and how he responded to certain things and how he nonviolent, right? All over the world. Incredible. Jesus is echoing Proverbs chapter 25, verses 21 and 22. He says, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head. I'm telling you, I've heard this so many different times. People say, oh yeah, this is a way for you to get back at the person and get even and really show them burning coals on their head kind of thing. And that'll show them you still do the right thing, but you leave them. That's not what it means at all. To heap burning coals on someone's head means to respond to an enemy's mistreatment and cruelty in unexpected kindness and generosity and love. That's what it means. Instead of seeking revenge, your good deed forces the other person to look in the mirror. You have to look in the mirror and say, you know what? There's some changes I need to make in my life. I am greedy. I am this. I am that. Whatever it is, it forces the other person to look in the mirror, to feel remorse and to feel shame, and then hopefully transform that person's heart. In all three examples, if you were to respond in kind, all you would be doing is causing more harm, more harm, more harm, more harm. It perpetuates the cycle of harm. And what Jesus did not want to do, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and turn the other cheek. That was what was trying to be avoided. We are called to avoid a couple of things. Shrinking back, okay? Just shrinking back out of fear, and also pushing back out of violence. Both Jesus did not want. See, in a Christian worldview, sometimes up is down and down is up. And if you're ever confused or you're in a gray, you think you're in a gray area, just look at the world and look at the world says and just turn it upside down. 90% of the time, you'll be right. Whatever the world tells you, do the opposite, and 90% of the time, you're going to be right. Jesus is taking the great commandment to a whole new level. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Takes it to a new level. Turn the other cheek literally means that you see and you treat other people, you treat everyone as a person created in the image of God, and you look for their highest good. You look out for their highest good. That's what Jesus is asking of us. Jesus' call to turn the other cheek focuses on restoring the harmony that God intended at creation. He wants each one of us to try to bring a little of what he intended from the very beginning into our lives. And the way we do that is not to give harm for harm, greed for greed. All that does is perpetuate the same thing. The goal of an eye and a tooth for a tooth was meant to limit the escalation of violent retaliation. That's in the Old Testament. And that was Jesus' desire as well. In other words, the goal is to break the cycle of violence by preventing people from taking basically personal revenge and ensuring, this is important, this is so important, and ensuring that the punishment fits the crime. Not pouring concrete into someone's Cadillac because they built a fence too close to your property. That's not what Jesus is calling us to do. And as always, Jesus sets the perfect example. When they struck him, he turned the other cheek. He gave up all of his clothes. And he took that cross and he walked the extra mile for us. But Jesus was never, this is important, Jesus was never a powerless victim. When Pilate said to Jesus, don't you realize, because Jesus wouldn't respond, don't you realize I have the power to either set you free or crucify you? Jesus' response is pretty clear in John chapter 19, verse 11. You would have no power over me if you were not given it from above. Jesus did not retaliate harm for harm. Matter of fact, he does the complete opposite. He loves his enemy. He loves his enemies to the very end, praying that God the Father would forgive them to his last breath. That's what his response was. See, when we choose to resist evil through acts of love and kindness and generosity, instead of perpetuating acts of harm, we set a Christ-like example. Honestly, a true Christ-like example of justice, true justice, and true peace. And that's what Jesus desires of every one of us. God, thank you so much for this time we can spend together. Father, thanks for the opportunity to just learn more about your word and how we can apply it to our lives right now with our relationships, with our spouse, with our kids, in school, at work, Lord God, in every area of our lives. I pray that we would just try with all of our hearts to be more like you each and every day. And in our desire to become more like you, lead other people into a closer relationship with you. We pray these things in Jesus' precious and holy name, who's done all these things for us, who's gone the extra mile, Lord God. We thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. Love you guys. Have a great, great week.